Hello, Jorbs here with another episode of Jorbs Scribbles on the Screen and talks about every single thing in the Slay the Spire compendium. Today, I'm going to be talking about Blood for Blood. This is an uncommon attack for Ironclad. It starts at a 4 energy cost, but it costs 1 less energy for each time you lose HP in the combat that you're in. And it deals 18 damage. And then its upgrade takes it down to a 3 starting cost and makes it deal 22 damage. So it makes it a little bit more immediately playable and also gives it a bit more damage. First thing to say about Blood for Blood is that it deals a lot of damage. 18 upgrading to 22, that's a lot. There aren't many Ironclad cards that attack for this much damage without you having to jump through many hoops. And you do have to jump through a hoop for this, but the hoop is like that you take damage, which is very normal. It's not super unusual for you to take damage. You have to be doing incredibly well in a run of Slay the Spire and Ascension 20 to not be having to dip into your health pool as a resource as you go through fights, especially the tougher fights and the boss fights and so on and so forth. So, I said, like, don't underestimate this in longer fights, like boss fights. If you're vulnerabling an enemy, this is going to be hitting for about 30-ish. In a boss fight, the fight's going to go long. It's likely going to be costing 0. And hitting something for 30 for 0 energy is really quite good. There's a thing in Slay the Spire where there are a lot of fights where you can solve them with linear or front-loaded damage. So what I mean by that is something has 50 health, and the way that you kill it is you hit it for 20 and then 10 3 times, and that kills it. You didn't have to worry about playing any strength cards, you didn't have to worry about defending really, you've just killed it with your attacks. And one of the big things in Slay the Spire is recognizing when you hit a threshold where it's not worth it to be investing in killing something with those front-loaded linear cards anymore. If something has 120 health, is it still worth it to be playing that 20 damage attack? Or in this situation, do you want to be playing block cards and demon form to wait a little while and then you'll kill it later with like a sword boomerang or a heavy blade, for example? And the existence of a card like Blood for Blood in your deck extends the point where you have to pivot to thinking about winning fights by scaling significantly. You can start looking at Act 2 boss fights, and if you have a deck with Blood for Blood and another incredibly high damage attack and some good card draw, that can sort of be your scaling. You don't necessarily need to have a Demon Form or In Flames or something like that if you have attacks that deal this much damage for one card. So definitely keep an eye on that. Not saying that you always have to beat the Act 2 boss that way, but if you have the option to, it's nice to know that you can. It's common to take some damage on turn 1 in a lot of fights. Ironclad also has a lot of cards that you would like to be able to play which deal self-damage, so offering Hemokinesis, Combust, Brutality, all of these cards are between playable and very good. I would say leaning heavily towards the above average side of things, particularly Offering and Combust I think are both tremendously good. And so if you have like a couple of cards like that in your deck, plus your turn 1 isn't that great, if you think about what happens in Act 2 on turn 1, a lot of the time you're getting attacked by things and not drawing enough block cards to not take any damage. This card can actually be really good if you just draw it turn 2 in shorter fights. So, there's the boss fight thing to consider. There's like, if I just draw it on turn 2 or 3, it's pretty good in a lot of fights to consider. It has a nice number on it for Snecko-Eye, so it's nice that it's good with Snecko-Eye. It's also nice with Runic Pyramid, because if you draw it too early to be able to play it, it's no problem. You just hold it until you're able to play it later in the fight. So the fact that this card works nicely with a lot of the strong things that Ironclad can do, and also just by itself is a useful resource for just having really big numbers for some fights where you might not have gotten your scaling online yet and may need some big number solution to the fight, like say the Automaton fight, speaks very highly of it. It's a really nice card to be able to fit into your deck because of that. And in general, I would say there are probably more moments that Blood for Blood is strong than most players expect when they look at this card. My tendency in talking with players who are newer to Slay the Spire has been to see people thinking that you shouldn't take damage much in fights and heavily undervaluing both cards that cost you health when you play them, and also cards like Blood for Blood, which require, you to have taken some damage by the time you get to like turn 3 and draw it. But keeping an eye out for when this card is good, which I think, it's impossible for me to say for sure, but I'd say like 50% of the time that I see a Blood for Blood, I think, oh yeah, that's probably pretty good here. And maybe like 25% of the time, I think, oh, this card's incredible here. Making sure that you're finding those scenarios where it's pretty good or even better than pretty good is going to help you to get through, in particular, I would say Act 2. But even then, like, this card's really good for Act 2 elites. Like, Book of Stabbing often hits you multiple times in a turn. Slavers often hit you multiple times on turn 1, and then you sort of want to be able to kill them by the end of turn 2 a lot of the time. A lot of hallway fights, you get attacked for 8 times 3 on turn 1 of a hallway fight. You get attacked for 21 and 10 by 2 different enemies on turn 1 of a hallway fight, and you can only block for like 15, so you've gotten hit twice. Tons and tons and tons of good scenarios for this card, just basically. And then even like there are lots of boss fights. I forget if I talked about this with Anger. I think I probably did when I was talking about Anger. But Anger as a 0-cost attack can end up being a really strong late fight scaling mechanism for boss fights, where if you have a couple of battle trances, you can like get rid of a lot of the cards from your deck by exhausting them with True Grit or Burning Pact, or you play your like Feel No Pain and Inflame and they're not in your deck anymore because you've put them in play. And then at the end of the fight, you can just draw tons of Angers and just play them, and if you have like 10 strength, all of a sudden you're dealing truckloads of damage and the boss is dead all of a sudden. Blood for Blood sort of does that without requiring you to have had any strength. So if you're in that situation where you have a lot of card draw, perhaps one of the card draw cards is an offering to help you out with Blood for Blood being good in early hallway fights, this can actually be a card that's like a significant part of you beating the heart fight. And I don't know if that would be super surprising to a lot of people, but certainly in my brain, when I think about Ironclad strategies that beat the heart fight, a lot of that space is dedicated to like scaling a bunch of strength and playing Reaper, or playing Feel No Pain and Dark Embrace and Barricade and making a ton of block, or something like that. And the runs where I managed to beat the heart by like blocking for just barely enough, maybe with a disarm or something, and then just playing Blood for Blood like 3 times per turn, because you can play the same Blood for Blood 3 times in the same turn in some situations with Ironclad decks if you have like the Burning Pacts and a Battle Trance at the end and stuff like that. Those can be really, really cool 1-runs, and they can be 1-runs where you couldn't have won with many cards other than Blood for Blood, believe it or not. There aren't that many Ironclad cards where you can both spend a lot of energy on drawing cards every turn and also deal a lot of damage. It's actually really hard to do something like that. You've got Anger, sort of, but you need a lot of strength as well. If you're drawing a lot of cards, you can like play Limit Break multiple times, but Limit Break does cost energy, so the way that it works is a little bit different from how Blood for Blood feels. But yeah, this is a strong card in the right situations, and an okay card in a lot of other situations. And I would just say keep an eye out for when you're in situations where it's good. Oh, another one that I think is important to note actually is Hexaghost, because a lot of the time Hexaghost is like you need to deal lots of damage to it, and it hits you times 6 on turn 2, and a lot of the time you won't be blocking all of that, and so Blood for Blood's just quite good at serving that purpose for the Hexaghost fight too. Alright, this was I think this is one of the more unique and interesting and complicated to evaluate cards, so I ended up talking about it for a little bit longer. I hope that's okay. I still feel like there's a lot of stuff to, there's a lot of stuff that is impossible to say for sure about this card. And probably if you're sitting at home thinking about different interactions, you're going to notice like certain relics make this card even more appealing than others, and so on and so forth. But just keep an eye on it. You shouldn't be looking at Blood for Blood and thinking, oh yeah, I always take this card, or looking at it and thinking, oh, I never take this card, I really dislike it. You should definitely be looking at Blood for Blood and thinking, well, let me think about what fights are coming up and how good my deck is at abusing this card, because it's definitely a card which can be abused. Alright, hope you enjoyed the chat. See you next time.